and welcome to this side event of the 8th Tokyo International Conference on African Development, TICAD. My name is Victor Jimba, Chief of UNIDO Regional Coordination Division Africa, and I will be moderating the side event. During the event, we will present the main findings of UNIDO Industrial Development Report 2022, entitled The Future of Industrialization in the Post-Pandemic World, and we will discuss the implications of these findings for Africa. The event will be divided in two parts. During the first part, Mr. Nobuya Araguchi, Chief of UNIDO Industrial Policy Research Unit at UNIDO, will summarize the main findings of the report. Then, in the second part, a panel of leading experts in this field will discuss this finding and the implication for the continent. Following the panel discussion, we will open the floor to your questions. To participate, please use the Q&A tool of Zoom. You can see the instruction in the chat at the bottom of the screen. We really look forward to your active participation contribution during the event. So with no further delay, we will now open the session with a pre-recorded video from UNIDO Director General, Mr. Gerd Müller. The video, please.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Best greetings from UNIDO to TICAD8, and thank you to the governments of Japan and Tunisia for convening this important summit. UNIDO has been a strong supporter of the TICAD process since 1993. You have made a great progress through the high-level policy dialogue between African leaders and international development partners. Today, more than ever before, we need such strong partnerships. All nations must work closely together to build a better and more resilient future. We are in this together, Excellencies. UNIDO is pleased to share the key findings of its flagship report, the Industrial Development Report 2022. It analyzes the impact of the COVID-19 crisis on all levels, countries, industries, and companies. And this analysis identifies the key factors that give economies resilience. Understanding these factors is essential for informed decision-making, essential to create strategies to effectively prepare for future crises. Industrial development that is inclusive and sustainable builds dynamic, innovative, and people-centered economies. Sustainability creates resilience. This is what we as the international community must strive for. The recovery from the COVID-19 polypandemic, climate change, conflicts, and soaring food and energy prices. These are the major challenges in Africa and worldwide. These challenges are not small, but they can be solved in global cooperation and solidarity, and in global responsibility. As the Director General of UNIDO, I am committed to making UNIDO an even stronger partner in fighting poverty and hunger, fighting climate change, and in creating jobs. We stand with you. We will do our part. A world without hunger is possible. TICAD is a great example of what is possible with this spirit of solidarity, where all benefit. I look forward to seeing what new industrial and innovation policy ideas come from your discussions. To make sure we see a green recovery in Africa, I wish you all success. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We thank the Director General of UNIDO for this excellent introduction to the side event. As the DG has just highlighted, the IDR 2022 brings new insight into how the poly-pandemic has affected the industrial sector and the prospect for the future of industrialization as economies all over the world continue to rebound and recover better and faster. I will now give the floor to Mr. Nobuya Araguchi, Chief of UNIDO Industrial Policy Research Unit. We will present the main findings and the messages of the report. Dear Mr. Araguchi, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. Let me share the screen. I hope you can see the slide. So, Industrial Development Report 2022, the title is The Future of Industrialization in a Post-Pandemic World. The report investigates the COVID-19 impact on global industry and prospects for post-pandemic recovery in view of ongoing megatrends. And building on this analysis, the report provides policy recommendations and a call for action to advocate for an inclusive and sustainable industrial recovery. The presentation follows the 4 questions which align with the content of the report. The first question is, what was the global and regional impact of the COVID-19 crisis? 2, why did some countries do better? The third question, what can we expect for the future? And finally, how can we build a better future? So first question, what was the global and regional impact of the COVID-19 crisis? The crisis had profound socio-economic impact at the global level. In 2020, GDP fell by 3.3% in the world. That was the deepest global recession in 70 years. And we have lost 255 million jobs only in 2020. And 97 million more people are estimated to live in extreme poverty due to the pandemic. As you can see, the figure, if we had continued the trend we observed before the pandemic, we should have reached the end of the dotted line. But due to the crisis impact in 2020, we are now at the end of the solid line. So the world GDP is still 4.2% below the level projected for 2021. But not all regions were affected equally. Industrial regions were indicated by green bars, and developing regions were indicated by blue bars. And as you see, on average, developing and emerging industrial economies were more impacted than industrialized economies. And within developing regions, the most impacted are small islands development states due to their reliance on service industry, tourism industry, and India. And less impacted are South and Central Asia, except for India and China. As for African countries, North Africa, African LDCs, and Sub-Saharan Africas, their impact were a bit less than the developing countries average, but still they had 6 to 7% output loss projected for 2021. And above all, the impact on industrial sectors in African countries were much stronger. Here, we looked at industrial production. 100 means pre-pandemic level of industrial production. And we see the world trend industrial production reached minimum in Q2 in 2020, and now we have surpassed the pre-pandemic levels. But as for Africa, decline started later, but was much deeper, and recovery is slower than the global trend. By the end of 2020, still we see the industrial production below the pre-pandemic levels. Within the industrial sector, the impacts were highly heterogeneous across industries, farms, workers, both globally and in Africa. This is a summary table of the evidence we reported in the Industrial Development Report. At industry level, health industries, they survived, not only they survived better, but sometimes they performed better than normal time due to the high demand for health-related products. And information technology-related industries performed better than others, and also industries producing essential goods such as food and paper. On the other hand, labor-intensive industries, especially producing non-essential goods, and especially those integrated in global value chains, were affected most. At farm level, larger farms performed better than SMEs, and digitally advanced farms survived better than digitally backward farms. And farms with high production capabilities survived better than those with low production capabilities. And at worker level, male and formal workers performed better. On the other hand, female, youth, temporary, and informal workers had to bear the brunt of the impact of the COVID-19. An impact of the pandemic on African farms' profits. Here, we can look at farms' profits were strongly impacted in Africa, on average around 36% decline among all African farms, surveyed farms. The impact was much larger in SMEs than larger farms. In all cases, African farms reported larger losses than farms in other developing regions. How about the impact on jobs? Based on our survey, employment was also severely affected. African farms laid off around 20% of their employees between Q4 2019 and Q1 2021. And job cuts were particularly severe across SMEs. And the layoff dynamic were quite similar to those observed in other regions of the world. How about the gender gap? We looked at average percentage change in employment by 1% fall in sales. Here, female workers are more affected by the crisis than male workers among African farms. The gender gap was particularly large across African SMEs. Why did some countries do better? The report explored different factors that amplified or reduced the crisis impact. At the overall level, of course, the severity of the pandemic and countries' coping measures made difference in terms of the impact of COVID-19, and channels of impact, supply side, disruptions of operations, shortages and higher cost of inputs, and shortage of cash flow, demand side, changes in customers' preferences, peaks, falls of demand, and uncertainty for investments. Country features, degree of integration with global markets, domestic market size, and physical space to implement support policies and so on, and industrial capabilities for countries. Sector features, degree of essentiality, and labor intensity of sectors, manufacturing industries, and firm features, firm size, liquidity, global integration, digitalization, human capital, technological capabilities, and so on. All these factors have affected the level of firm resilience defined in terms of robustness, capability to maintain employment, sales, profits, and readiness, ability to have strategic changes or adapt to new circumstances. And among these different factors, two stood out: the level of industrial capabilities at country level and the level of digitalization of manufacturing firms. And both elements have been key in driving resilience during the pandemic. Countries with stronger industrial capabilities were more resilient to the economic impact. We looked at pandemic-specific factors such as severity and stringency of containment measures, and country structural factors such as income level, domestic market size, and level of industrial capabilities. Here, industrial capability is proxied by UNIDO's Competitiveness Industrial Performance Index. We had 140 countries in this database, and factors below 0 are associated with lower impact. So the level of countries' industrial capabilities are the most important factor softening the impact of the crisis. Also, digitally advanced manufacturing firms were more resilient than the rest during the COVID-19 pandemic. Here, digitally advanced firms is defined firms with using the latest vintages of digital technologies in production. We have collected 4,000 firms' responses in 26 developing countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. As you can see, in all three dimensions, sales, profits, and employment, digitally advanced firms suffered lower impact than the rest. Both in terms of industrial capabilities and industrial digitalization, Africa is lagging behind. Here, in terms of competitive industrial performance index, which proxies the industrial capabilities, African countries in both LDC group or developing countries group as a whole, they have lower CIP level, competitive industrial performance index, around 1/3 that of the other two regions. And digital gap, here we looked at the share of analog firms. And this share of analog firms are higher in both African countries in both groups, LDC group and developing and emerging industrial economies groups. What can we expect for the future? The long-term impact of COVID-19 depends on its interplay with ongoing megatrends that are likely to shape the future of industrialization. And the report identified 3 important trends: digitalization and automation of industrial production. This affects essentially all spheres of business development and deeply changes the competitive advantages of firms and nations. And global economic power shifts, emergence of Asia, especially China, and its structural transformation towards a knowledge-driven high-income economies. And these shifts imply a major restructuring trade flows and global value chains. And the greening of industrial production. This calls for radically different business models and systemic transformations with far-reaching effects on the positioning of developing and emerging industrial economies in the world economy. These trends were, of course, operating already 10, 20 years before COVID-19. First, the left-hand side, robot density, world industrial robot density, robots per 1,000 workers. As you can see, last 20 years, it has been increasing rapidly. And middle figure, Asia Pacific developing countries' share in world manufacturing value added. It has been increasing steadily last 20 years. It has increased 30 percentage points. And right-hand side, world industrial CO2 emissions per unit of MBA. It has been declining quite significantly last 10 years. COVID-19 seems to have accelerated some of these trends. The COVID did not change the trend, but it seems to have accelerated some of these trends. We collected data by conducting survey in 26 countries in developing regions. As you see, online activity and automation increased in response to pandemic. And Asian firms are more prone to reignite post-pandemic investments. We asked questions whether firms expecting to increase post-pandemic investments. And Asian firms answered more positively to this question. They are likely to invest more in new equipment and new software. And more than 80% of firms expect greener practices post-COVID-19 period. How can we build a better future? Efforts should be coordinated at the local and global levels to achieve a recovery that enables a safer development path. And we need to align industrial policies with building back better strategies. This means to put the policies to work for the achievement of the SDGs, taking into account the megatrends which are likely to shape the future of industrialization and the tangible risk of global disasters like the COVID-19 pandemic. And these policies should promote a recovery that is green, inclusive, and resilient. And of course, these can only be achieved with the support of the international community. Industrial policies to promote a green, inclusive, and resilient recovery. First, green industrial policy should simultaneously target demand and supply side. Demand side, we need to shift consumer behavior through demand side instrument, and supply side, we have to provide incentives to improve farms' resource and energy efficiency and promote green innovation. Inclusive industrial policy, we need to support actors which are particularly vulnerable during the pandemic. At farm level, SMEs, we need to facilitate the uptake of new technologies and promote market diversification. At worker level, female, youth, and informal workers, we need to enhance their safety net provision and support employability. And industrial policy should also strengthen the resilience of countries against future risks. As for prevention, we need to build awareness and foster knowledge creation and exchange about new and existing risks. And preparedness, need to support farms' integration of industrial vulnerability data monitoring and evaluation mechanisms. Finally, how can we build a better future? The report includes a call for action to the international community to support an inclusive, sustainable, and resilient industrial recovery. Over the short term, the international community must address vaccine rollout and access and need to eliminate export restrictions and promote technology transfer for health-related products. Over the medium to long term, the international community should coordinate efforts to expand the policy space for developing countries. The recapitalization of development banks would be the key in this regard. Also, support for the development of industrial policy capabilities would be necessary for countries to develop the strategies that address country-specific conditions and sustain their recovery and future development. Furthermore, the international community needs to help countries accelerate technology transfer in digital and low-carbon technologies, while supporting them to strengthen their own capabilities through upgrading education, science, and technology capabilities. Finally, resilience to external shocks can be enhanced by fostering local productive capabilities in strategic industries such as health, pharmaceutical industries, and by mainstreaming risk management tools within industrial policy practices. Multilateral and multi-stakeholder collaboration must be the cornerstone of strategies for recovery and future of industrialization in a post-pandemic world. Countries and organizations must share their knowledge and experiences for the road to recovery and better future and ensure that no one is left behind. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Araguchi, for this excellent, I would say, excellent summary on the main findings and messages emerging from the report. Now, taking this summary as a background, I think full of a lot of information, useful, substantive information, we will now move to the second part of this session, in which a panel of distinguished experts will discuss these findings in the particular context of Africa. It is my pleasure then to present to you the members of the panel. First of all, Professor Carlos Lopez, who is professor at the University of Cape Town and former executive secretary of ECA. And Professor Fiona Tregena, who is professor at the University of Johannesburg and South African Research Chair in Industrial Development. Professor Alban Aure, who is the Director of the Economy Policy Analysis Unit at the Ivorian Economic and Social Research Center. We will be joined later through video recorded message by Her Excellency Dr. Rania Al-Mashat, who is the Minister of International Cooperation of Egypt. So let me now start the panel discussion, posing the first question that we go to Professor Lopez. We know that we have seen that, we heard that a key finding of the report is that Africa needs to accelerate industrial development, not only to achieve economic development, but also, as shown in the report, to strengthen resilience. Dear Professor Lopez, what are the main policy tools, from your opinion, that government around Africa can use for this? And how can they finance these policies? Over to you, Professor. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this question. and for allowing us to participate in this interesting panel with dear colleagues. I think it is very important what the report has recommended. The medium-term recommendations in particular ring extremely well with the analysis and assessment that have been made about the possibilities of accelerated industrialization in Africa. When it comes to the measures and different specific policies that can be introduced in light of the pandemic lessons, but also taking into account what we are living through with the impact of the war in Ukraine, it becomes very clear that we have now a different world emerging, one where the global value chains are going to be reevaluated, and the countries have to prepare themselves very quickly to respond to these changes. I would say that the most important change is the fact that we are going to assess risk in a completely different way, and this is going to affect quite significantly the way we are going to look into industrialization. With the debates about onshoring, reshoring, nearshoring of production systems, what we are seeing emerging is a different measurement of what the value is going to be. And this is going to affect our notions of measuring productivity. Is also going to affect our notions of how we deal with trade rules that are likely to change quite dramatically, because we are going to now have to deal with security concerns that are going to change the principle that you produce where is the cheapest in the world. And you know, this was responsible for a great development of industrial production worldwide. Africa, as a latecomer to most of the global value chains, is now going to be basically having to deal with two storms at the same time. Not only it has missed a number of developments, including the ones that have been mentioned in the report regarding robotization, automation, and different ways that have increased productivity. It has also to deal with these new concerns about security that are going to change the possibilities for entering the global value chains the same way. But I don't want to consider that this is just negative. It can be quite an opportunity. Nearshoring offers opportunities for Africa to deal with the very difficult situation where most of its natural resources are exported quite far for transformation, losing jobs, losing possibilities of manufacturing value addition. Now you can reposition all of that. You can also deal with the environmental concerns in a completely different light, given the fact that Africa has immense potential for green industrialization if you consider the energy potential of the continent for renewables, and so on and so forth. So I think the measures that governments have to take are around understanding that the strategies have to change, although, as it has been mentioned in the presentation by Mr. Nobuya, we have the same trends. These trends have accelerated some characteristics and have introduced these security-related elements and environmental-related elements that offer great opportunities for Africa if we have the right policy.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Professor Lopez. I think a great reflection. I take note, you highlight the changes global in the global value chain, the issue, the way of assessing the risk, I think the way of seeing, perceiving industrialization, and also deriving the policy around. So particularly also the issue of security. But those aspects, those changes are not just negative. We have to see them also as opportunity. So thank you very much, Professor Lopez, for this reflection on how particularly African countries can use this change this trend to really achieve the national objective. So now let me move to the next panelist, Professor Tregrena. Another important issue discussed in the report relate to the fact that the pandemic has boosted digitalization, even in developing countries. Digital technologies, in turn, we see that play now a key role in strengthening resilience during the crisis. We experiment it, particularly in the continent. So in this regard, what role can digitalization play in fostering industrial development in Africa, and how can the digital divide between countries and firms be closed? We saw the figures, they speak louder. So over to you, Professor Trigena. Thank you.
Thanks, Victor. It's great to be part of this panel and to have the opportunity to reflect a bit on the IDR in the African context. I think it's true, as you mentioned, that the pandemic has boosted digitalization internationally, particularly on the consumer side, but also in terms of production. Yet it's still very low in most African countries. For example, on the consumer side, e-commerce is really a tiny fraction of retail, and also on the productive side, digitalization remains low. I think the findings of the IDR, which Nobuyo has also highlighted in his overview, really underscores the importance of digital technologies to resilience during the crisis. And interestingly, that's both at the firm level and at the country level. It's contributed, these technologies have contributed to agility and to adaptability in the unexpected conditions from over the past 2.5 years. And we can observe that firms which are more digitally advanced, we're better placed to adapt and to introduce production-related responses to cope with the exigencies of the pandemic compared to less digitally advanced firms. And as a result, the more digitally advanced firms were less impacted by the economic effects of the crisis. They were more responsive. And I think we can extend this lesson and probably extrapolate it to adaptability to other current and future shocks and crises, both those that we are aware of now and unknown future shocks and crises. I think beyond that, of course, digitalization is important for industrialization, for structural change, for catching up in various ways, including, for example, for productivity, as Carlos mentioned, for competitiveness, capabilities, for product complexity and sophistication, for upgrading in global value chains and so on. And all of this is particularly crucial for late industrializers, such as in African countries, or late industrializers, but challenging. And we can, of course, as the report highlights, we can observe huge heterogeneity among developing countries, both comparing Africa with the rest of the world, as well as within African countries. So heterogeneity in terms of prior conditions in not only digital technologies themselves, but in levels of industrialization, skills, policy capacity and sophistication, and so on. And in the degree and effects of digitalization, as well as other 4R technologies. And of course, many African countries are still undergoing elements of earlier industrial revolutions. And I think there's also an interesting connection between this IDR, which is being, which we're discussing today, and the 2020 IDR, which focused on these issues of digital technologies, and actually looked at in classified countries across the world in their readiness and their uptake. And in the previous IDR, or for example, in the group of countries which were classified as followers, as users, we only find Algeria and South Africa. And we find a handful of African countries as classified as latecomers. Nigeria as a latecomer in producers, and a couple of African countries as latecomers and users. And the vast majority of African countries fall outside of that altogether, and are really lagging far behind in terms of digital technologies. Obviously, further from the technological frontier, there's gaps in digital technologies, less competitive in the relevant technology and skills and so on. So in terms of, as you asked, how to close that digital divide, I think there's no easy answers, but it's important, I think, to situate it within a broader industrialization and structural change agenda. Because I think succeeding in closing the digital divide really needs everything that success in industrialization needs, and more on top of that. But it's not really something that we can pursue separately from that broader industrialization and structural change agenda. So we need both the kind of traditional industrial capabilities and some of the new or emerging digital capabilities. And in particular, to meet some of those minimums of thresholds and preconditions through both transversal enablers and digital infrastructure, regulatory framework, skills, and so on, and those more specific. I think we can identify the opportunities for leapfrogging. They're not always there, but there are opportunities for leapfrogging in terms of some digital technologies. And to put in place those, as I said, both of those cost-cutting and specific conditions, include things like ICT infrastructure. In many African countries, even we're struggling, including my own here, we're struggling with basic electricity supply. And obviously, those are some of the basic preconditions that need to be addressed. But yeah, let me leave it there, and perhaps we can come back to some of these issues.
Thank you very much, Professor Tigrena. Your insight, your interesting perspective on the adoption of digital technology to promote development in African countries. You talk about agility, adaptability. We saw it during COVID-19, and late industrializers. Digitalization is also important but challenging. So for that, we do not address this issue separately from the industrial structural transformation agenda. We have to be part of this broad agenda. So I think it's clear, for African country policymakers, and giving the fact that both at the macro, meso, and micro level, action need to be implemented. Thank you very much, Professor Tigrena. This also connects very well with the next question to our panelists, Professor Aure. Professor, the pandemic and the ongoing increase in global food price, notably, has pushed thousands of people into poverty, especially in Africa. We have been living that in the last weeks. So, dear Professor Aure, what actions can government implement in the African context to take these people out of poverty? What role can manufacturing play in this process, knowing that particularly in the case of Côte d'Ivoire, the country just adopted its new national development plan with ambitious objectives, particularly relying on the manufacturing sector. The floor is yours, Mr. Professor Aure. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. And I would like first to express my sincere gratitude to UNIDO management for inviting me as panelist. And I may say that indeed the COVID-19 pandemic and recurrent global inflation on food prices put or aggravate the risk of vulnerabilities and increase poverty in our countries. It has been demonstrated during the presentation. There is a strong threat to the ability of poor households to maintain their activities, their revenues, their income levels, and feed themselves. And in developing countries, the vast majority of these persons, poor persons, actually work in the informal sector and lack of different types of capabilities, starting with the educational level. This is really important. So I must say that since 2020, I've been coordinating a research project funded by the International Development Research Center of Canada, IDRC, on the impact of public policies related to COVID-19 on vulnerable households and businesses in 4 African countries. These are Burkina Faso, Cameroon, Côte d'Ivoire, and Senegal. And this project focuses mainly on youth, gender disparities, adults, and informal as well as formal firms. And for what concerns policies that can be implemented to address the poverty situation in Africa, our results show that the public policies that have enabled poor households and vulnerable businesses to be more resilient to the adverse effects of the COVID-19 are, among others for sure, the unconditional fund transfers to these households. And that has been implemented, for example, in Côte d'Ivoire. This is one thing. Another thing is the financial support in terms of loans at low interest level rates to firms, even to informal firms, both large and small formal firms and informal firms. We have also noted that public support for water and electricity consumption has been very, very relevant. It has been the case of suspending bills payments and transferring electricity units to poor households. And also, we have noticed the suspension of tax payment and tax relief, and also coaching offered to vulnerable enterprises for crisis management. And companies have been able themselves to develop endogenous resiliency strategies by innovating in the mechanism of production, development of new products, teleworking, and in their sales like online sales now, and distribution like home delivery. Households have made use of their savings, and some have called for transfers from their relatives or have changed jobs or professional activities. So these policies, public policies, have been relevant, have been effective during the pandemic, even ongoing pandemic now. And these policies need to be strengthened in our countries, like the transfers to poor households, for example, support to SMEs, and also assistance to families, poor families, vulnerable families. And these efforts at the government level and the resiliency strategies of firms and households, as I mentioned, should be strengthened. And the lessons learned are that there is a need to improve methods of targeting poor. Because in our countries, when we talk about poor countries, vulnerable, poor people, poor households, vulnerable people, we should have some clear targeting method policies so that we can deliver policies that can address the realities of these populations, of these people. So this is a lesson derived from our study. There is also a need to adapt public policies for the realities, for the needs, to the needs of the households, because we have learned from our data, from our research project, that some policies have been much more effective for households headed by men. So there is a need for a gender-sensitive policies when we are in a situation of crisis, for example. And you were talking, Victor, about the manufacturing sector. It is clear that the manufacturing sector is expanding in our countries. We have a clear structural transformation of our economies. This is something very, very important. And the manufacturing sector is the one or among the sectors which offer decent works with higher labor productivity, with higher, salaries, also revenues. So in face of the rise in world prices of food products, it's more than necessary to ensure the development of the agro industry for, improving processing actually with different agricultural products. And we need to support also other sectors like the packaging, the fertilizers, the transport and logistics, metallurgy, to increase agricultural yields and for processing and marketing. It is clear that in our countries in Africa, post-harvest losses are significant, and with low processing capacities. So an essential solution lies in investment in the development of the value chains in our countries. value chains and also putting more emphasis on the regional value chains. I've read during the presentation, it has happened that actually those firms connected to others in different countries have been much more impacted by the COVID. But we need to define clear policies for integration of different value chains at least at the regional levels. So these are my points for this question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Aore. You highlighted a lot of very interesting points, not only through the report that has demonstrated the importance of the public policy, resilient public policies targeting the poor, the vulnerable segment group in the society, and also highlighting different policies that have been adopted in terms of the transfer, the unconditional transfer of funds, the financial support, and particularly the innovation. I think innovation here is key. I think is through all the sector, when we see how Africa faced the situation, it was mainly through innovation, be it incremental, different level. That is very much important, and also the issue of targeting, ensuring that the policy are very matched with the need. That also brings the issue of data. You highlighted the informal sector, how to measure it. I think also is very important, because all the data is relevant to the formal sector, and we know that the majority people are in the informal sector. So targeting related also with the issue of data, therefore a data revolution. The gender aspect of it is also very key, very important. In the manufacturing sector, confirming the finding of the study, the centrality of industrialization of manufacturing through the productivity, the innovation it can carry, the employment, etc. And but also particularly highlighting the issue, not only the value chain, but regional value chain. That bring me to highlight here the issue of, particularly in Africa, regional integration. Yes, digitalization, yes, industrial greening, but also regional integration. So thank you very much, Professor Aore. Now we will bring in the Minister of International Cooperation of Egypt, Mrs. Mashat, through a video recorded message, who will talk about Egypt's experience in dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, the most effective policy that has been adopted, and also in terms of the recovery, because we are more or less in the recovery phase, and we also have also very good lesson we can learn from there, and also looking the prospect in the future, what the main challenges ahead, and how government plan to address those challenges. So through the video, I think we will have key element of response to those questions. Thank you very much.
Director General Muller, colleagues and friends. At the outset, I would like to begin my statement by thanking one of Egypt's most valuable development partners, the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, for their prominent role in supporting sustainable industrial development in Egypt across various sectors in close alignment with Egypt's national priorities. This year, the Industrial Development Report 2022, under the theme, The Future of Industrialization in a Post-Pandemic World, echoes important findings that call for greater regional economic integration to achieve sustainable, green, and inclusive industrial development. In this context, the report emphasizes that the future of industrial development in the African continent post-COVID-19 must entail regional cooperation and collective decision-making among all countries to endorse the three main areas of concern, namely industrial digitalization and automation, global production rebalancing, and finally, industrial greening. It is thus imperative to strengthen the multilateral dialogue and find innovative solutions to support our goals and ambitions in these unprecedented times. Honorable guests, as a founding member of the United Nations, Egypt has always been at the forefront of countries developing a long-term strategic plan to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, based on national priorities and principles, with the aim of achieving a comprehensive and sustainable development path. To achieve SDG 9, industry, innovation, and infrastructure, Egypt continues investing in resilient infrastructure to unleash the potential of a dynamic and competitive economic forces, generating employment, promoting inclusive entrepreneurship, and facilitating trade. In this context, the government of Egypt is currently finalizing the strategic cooperation framework with the UN, named UNSDCF, which covers the period 2023 to 2027, and aims to support the government of Egypt's priorities in achieving economic and social development while taking into consideration the necessity to build on the achievements made during the current strategic cooperation framework, UNPDF, which ended in June 2022. This is in line with 5 pillars that have been identified for the upcoming cooperation framework: investment in human capital, inclusive economic development, environmental sustainability, transparency and good governance, and finally, empowerment of women. Ladies and gentlemen, Egypt's current and upcoming government action plans, as well as the various presidential initiatives and sectoral strategies launched during the past decade, showcase the overarching commitment towards investing in a well-equipped labor force that can adapt to the demands of the Fourth Industrial Revolution and the transition to a sustainable, inclusive, and competitive green economy. In this context, thematic pillars related to industrial development were placed at the heart of the reform to build back better. The efforts of the Egyptian government can be quantified with an ODA SDG mapping tool, which has been developed by the Ministry of International Cooperation and allows for SDG Goal 9, Industry, Innovation, and Infrastructure, where there are currently 118 ongoing projects worth $5.7 million, accounting for a total of 22.3% of total ODA in Egypt. Let me repeat, $5.7 billion, accounting for 22% of total ODA in Egypt. For SDG Global Goal 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities, there are currently 32 ongoing projects worth $1.4 billion, which accounts for 5.8% of total ODA in Egypt. Moreover, a number of strategic priority areas have been identified by the government to accelerate inclusive and sustainable industrialization, namely focusing on industrial policy and governance, investment promotion, achieving green industry, building smart cities, and mainstreaming Industry 4.0. In this context, the government embraces the role of the private sector, bringing it to the table, which requires coordinated action and a commitment to the environment, social, and governance principles. Excellencies, friends, and colleagues, I would like to use this opportunity to extend my deepest gratitude to UNIDO, and I look forward to welcoming you all in the world's green city of peace, Sharm el-Sheikh, at COP27 next November. Let us all speak with one voice for all of humanity for a dedicated climate action. Thank you.
So I will suggest I will go back to the panelists now. Based on the first intervention, let's quickly go back to Professor Lopez and asking what the lesson we can extract from the pandemic in terms of international policy coordination. What needs to be improved and how. You highlighted how to assess the risks now, and the way we address the issue of industrialization, industrial policy, and the issue of security. What lesson can we learn, can we extract from the pandemic in terms of international policy coordination? We have an experience, we have seen what happened. Dear Professor, if you please could provide us some highlight. Over to you, Professor Lopez. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have seen more difficulties in terms of policy coordination with this crisis that we have seen during the 2008-2009 financial crisis. There is a deterioration of the multilateral settings, and we can feel it in different ways. For instance, the responses from the international financial institutions, and particularly the IMF, have been quite strong, but they have been quite uneven. For instance, all the instruments that exist have proven to be more important and more responsive for developed economies than they are for developing economies, and particularly they were not appropriate for Africa. And since we are discussing Africa in particular, we can say that what the crisis has revealed is the need for a comprehensive overhaul of some of the financial responses for situations like the crisis we have lived. Also, on the trade dimensions, we have seen the difficulties with the global value chains being doubled by difficulties with supply chains. And a lot of these supply chains have been disrupted more than for reasons of transport, although that was central. They've also been deeply affected by regulatory impediments and lack of coordination to actually get the responses that were required for the level of crisis the world was living. On the health dimensions of the crisis, obviously we have seen very interesting developments. On one hand, difficulties for supplies of different types of health-related requirements, but also amazing resilience on the part of some countries in Africa in particular. We have also seen the centrality of the debate about manufacturing of pharmaceuticals in the continent. I have never seen as much political mobilization for pharmaceutical industrialization opportunities as we have seen this time. It doesn't mean that things have really evolved that much. You know, if you look into the numbers, a couple of countries have benefited from new investments, but you know, overall there was no significant change in terms of indicators. But there is a complete different political attitude regarding this type of investment. And I think the pandemic has opened amazing opportunities also to accelerate Africa Continental Free Trade Area in this type of requirements, because people realize all of a sudden that Africans were left on their own in a number of fronts, and you know, the Continental Free Trade Area gain more currency. Again, what we have seen during the discussions of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, where slowness in trying to get particularly rules of origin and every debate relating to intellectual property. But I think it's a manifestation paradoxically, of the same importance given to possibilities of manufacturing and production in the continent and countries that have already a well-established industrial capacity, trying to defend it for their existing manufacturing capacity. So I think the lessons that we can derive from the crisis are, again, going in the direction of Africa becoming more marginal in relation to the existing instruments. And we have seen that with the discussions on that in particular, but also increasing political mobilization and agency on the part of Africans to ask for complete changes in systemic dimensions that affect the progress and development of the continent.
So good. So thank you very much, Professor, for this insight. I think it's very important. It's true that on the financial side, there have been some mobilization, some coordination, and as you highlighted, a lot has to be done also for the developing country. Very, very important on the issue of coordination with the disruption in the global value chain, and etc. And coming to Africa, it's true that the coordination we experience around particularly the pharmaceutical helped to advance the debate. You know that in the beginning of the century, Africa developed manufacturing, local manufacturing plant, but is with thanks to the pandemic, that now there's a real collective action around is implementation, and also in advancing the AFCFTA. So there are lessons learned that will help us to advance further in really tackling, advancing the recovery from the COVID-19. As you already said, the political mobilization is key. And coming to, thank you again, Professor Lopez. Coming to Professor Tregena, I will touch a bit on the different impact of the crisis at the firm level, suggesting differences in the productive capabilities. So how can this capability be strengthened in African countries to create more resilient enterprises? Because I already talked about the innovation we have seen, not only from the firms, but also from the consumer. Along rural, urban population, there's a lot of innovation in terms of trying to address the issue they are confronting. So how these capabilities can be strengthened in the Africa context for greater resilience. Over to you, Professor Tregena. Thank you.
Thanks, Victor. Well, I guess it was already quite widely recognized that productive capabilities are closely linked with industrialization and development catch-up. And in particular, as you mentioned, with innovation, with learning, with productivity, withstanding competition from exports and growing exports and so on. And I think there's interesting evidence in the IDR, and Nobuyo highlighted this as well in his presentation, around the importance of productive capabilities for withstanding the COVID crisis. And in answering your question, I'm also going to refer a bit to a background paper to the IDR, which was written by Carmen Naidu and myself, where we considered productive capabilities in two ways: technological capabilities at the firm level and production capabilities. And moving from the starting point that COVID had quite heterogeneous effects on manufacturing firms worldwide, differences across countries, across sectors and firms. We looked into what are the determinants of how COVID affected manufacturing firm outcomes differently. So how do we understand how some closed, some contracted, some were relatively unaffected, some expanded, and so on. And in particular, looking at how prior conditions at the firm level, the sector level, and at the national level, as well as firm responses during the pandemic and policy interventions shaped these firm level outcomes in terms of firm survival and the impact on firm employment and sales. And in particular, looking at the productive capabilities that you asked about, it became clear from the econometric evidence and that technological capabilities as well as production capabilities are found to be significant determinants of firm survival and firm resilience during the pandemic. So they really had a positive and significant effect in terms of shielding manufacturing firms from employment losses during the crisis and from closures, even when we take into account or control for other relevant country level and firm level factors. I think what kind of building on those sort of findings and what are some of the policy implications for African countries. It's clear that productive capabilities are not something which can be built up overnight. They really built through an incremental process of learning and sort of an iterative process at the firm level and the country level. So it's not something that when a crisis hits, you can like suddenly look at how to build up productive capabilities. So this really underscores the importance of investing in these on an ongoing basis, because the likelihood is that they will be relevant for other ongoing and future crises and challenges, as well as just more broadly, as I mentioned, for industrialization and catching up. You asked in terms of how they can be strengthened in African countries. I think, again, it's the most challenging, but most particularly needed in African and other developing countries. in particular for that catching up process, including for pushing into production of more complex products, for expanding exports and so on. And we have to recognize that these productive capabilities really develop through a long process of learning in the production process, so kind of learning by doing. So in this sense, you can really only build up these productive capabilities by producing. It's not, cannot be like developed or strengthened in abstract just by sending people on a course or whatever. They're really endogenous to the production process. So by industrializing, firms and countries will actually build up those productive capabilities, given that sort of endogeneity. But having said that, its purpose of learning is important. It's not just that you industrialize and automatically these productive capabilities get built up or strengthened as much as possible. So this also takes significant investments, including at the firm level, in skills development, in R&D and other forms of innovation, coming back to the digitalization and other 4R technologies that we spoke about earlier, different models of workplace organization, and so on. So it's combining that overall push towards industrialization with these active interventions and purposive learning at the firm level. And it's also, as I said, an iterative process between the firm level and the country level, because some of these productive capabilities are national or even regional in nature. So this points to the importance of industrial policy, as well as the integration between industrial policy and other relevant policy domains, education and skills policy, STI policies, and so on. And I think all of these can contribute to strengthening productive capabilities in African firms that are really necessary for Africa to take forward the industrialization agenda.
Okay, good. Thank you very much, Professor. Again, a very interesting point. Starting with the last one, the integration of policies, I think is very key. The fact that we also have to invest in R&D at the firm level, that is very important. Is an endogenous process also. Yeah, a producer as a whole is also not happening overnight. Yeah, it's an incremental process where the producer themselves, they have a role to play, but also the policy and also the aspect of mutual learning. I think it's very important. Technology transfer, technical capabilities, productive capabilities is through also the learning process. So all the ecosystem that will be really favorable, conducive for such endeavor, not only at the sectoral level, but the determinant can also be found at the national and regional level, and also at the continent, at the global level. So thank you very much for this very interesting highlight. And now I will end this second round of questions, going back to Professor Aore. Based on the Ivorian experience from Côte d'Ivoire, you know that very important, a lot of lessons during the crisis and also after the crisis, now entering in a new industrialization plan. Professor Aore, based on your experience in Côte d'Ivoire and other countries of the region, what do you think are the key capabilities that should be strengthened in Africa to be better prepared for the post-pandemic world? I know that Professor Tregrena touched a bit on those, Professor Lopez in a more holistic, global manner, but specifically in Côte d'Ivoire and in the region, what do you think, what are the key capabilities to be touched upon, to be worked on, and probably in your new industrial strategy and policies, you may have already embedded those aspects. Over to you, Professor Aure, and thank you.
Thank you, Victor, and I will support what has been said by Professor Lopez and Professor Tregrena for what concerns the need for developing the indigenous resiliency capacities of our businesses or firms. So you are talking about capabilities based on our works in Côte d'Ivoire as well as in different African countries, as I mentioned before. since we have a project concerning 4 African countries, we learned that a crucial capability to be developed or to be strengthened is the educational level of people, even of entrepreneurs. To strengthen, we need to strengthen the reading and numeracy skills, because if they cannot read, it is quite difficult for them to learn from themselves, to learn and to make use of the knowledge available for them at the international level. So literacy rates remain low in our countries in Africa, and particularly for women, which reduces their innovational capacity. So emphasis should be placed on technical and vocational training. When we are talking about education, we have a general education. This is important for basic skills, but we need to develop the technical and professional capacities or capabilities, because in the professional activities, this is the skills that we need to be, able to improve their activities, so to have some innovational possibilities. So this is one thing. Also, we need also to develop the digital capacities of entrepreneurs and as well as of households. It is necessary to reduce actually the gaps of digitalization. It has been mentioned already, and I would like to insist to emphasize on it, particularly for women and for also those who are in the rural areas, even agricultural persons working in the agricultural sector. And we are in the era of knowledge economy. So it is necessary to promote access to global knowledge in terms of production strategies, small-scale processing, and marketing. Because before becoming a large industrial firm, for example, they need to start as a small one and to go slowly, to move slowly and become later a large firm. So this is something important. What also we have learned from our data is the need to strengthen the networkings between producers, between even consumers, networking between those who are at the production level, at the distribution level, at the sales level. So also, because we have learned that if they are in association in a network, they will have higher possibility to reduce the informational gap and also higher capability to take benefit from economies of scale in the different countries. And something important also to be highlighted is that several young Africans are developing digital applications, startups, and to provide innovative solutions to the problem faced by the firms and households in Africa, particularly in the context of various shocks we are now facing with, like the pandemics, like food crisis, and so on. So there is need to support for public policies to support these young persons. These young persons in the really very nice, thinking and the way we are doing things and developing digital applications at its several levels, even to improve productivity in the agricultural sector, at the firms level, at the industrial level. So we need institutions, we need to help them at the government levels, but at the international institutions levels also. I'm talking about UNIDO, for example, to strengthen their activities and disseminate their technologies, because they are a lot of technologies have been developed recently, but they are unknown, they are not very well known among people. Finally, the current crisis highlights the need for states to invest in what we call the business intelligence to better anticipate, and need to accelerate also the structural transformation of economies. We should emphasize on increasing of productivity in all sectors. Innovation, we talk about innovation, but innovation are very, very important. Innovation starting by investment in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, in investing in TICAD8, To have appropriate response policies when shocks also occurred. This is also something important, as it has been said. So when we talk about capability, to summarize, we need to invest in digitalization and education, TICAD8, STEM, also to have good policies. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Professor. You also summarized for all of us. No need to move forward. So thanks a lot. TICAD8, STEM, literacy rate, digitalization, I think is key. So we have now 5 minutes to go to close our session. I think we can stay even longer, given the interest and the substance also of the exchange. But we have to close the session at 12:30 past 12. So now we will start the closing round. Yeah. So we will give the floor to 1 minute to each of our distinguished panelists to say a closing word, a closing remark, yeah, based on our discussion, and so that we can have those takeaways, and then we see how to implement all those in the continent. So I will start the same round with our dear Professor Lopez.
Thank you. I would say that we have this perennial debate about whether Africa can really accelerate its industrialization, and the pandemic just throws more complexity into the ring. But I'm convinced we have great opportunities if we take into account the transition towards a more carbon neutral production system. Because of the opportunities that Africa has for renewables, and particularly green hydrogen, which I think Africa has to use as the propeller for its own industrial development. So the recommendations of the report are very timely because they will increase the opportunity for African countries to pay attention to this amazing potential.
Thank you very much. To the point. Green industrialization, decarbonization, zero level, yeah, of carbon in our process. So thank you very much for this great point. Professor Trigena, please.
Thanks. Yeah, I think although the specificities of the COVID crisis were quite unique, obviously before it hit, there was already pre-existing crises, climate change, poverty, inequality, and so on. And most of the lessons that we can draw from the crisis, I think, are more broadly applicable. The IDR in particular has really a richness of analysis and a wealth of evidence. We've barely scratched, I think, some of the key points in the session, and really provides a rigorous basis for looking at the relevance of some of the policies that we were already aware of, and some ways in which those need to be adapted or extended. Obviously, the conditions are different across regions and across continents. So I think that for policymakers in engaging with the report, it's important to look at what's of particular relevance for their own countries, and what are the particular implications for industrial policy and other policies going forward.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor, highlighting the wealth of the IDR and calling really for the policymaker, the practitioner, to take advantage of it. So we continue to promote the IDR among the community in the continent and also outside the continent. Professor Aure, over to you, please.
Yes, thank you again, Victor. I want to say that without industrialization, we will keep thousands of millions of people in poverty in Africa. Because this is, I can say, the only one way to offer decent jobs to those people, to help them increasing their revenues, their capabilities. So policies will be addressed, will be implemented, should be implemented to help these people. And we should focus, as I mentioned, on education, on the ecosystem also. on providing good policies that address the realities of African people. And considering the case of youth, the case of with women in the rural areas, in the urban areas. So this is what I would like to highlight, the takeaway from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Aure, for this key highlight. In fact, inclusive and sustainable industrial development, taking into account all the other vulnerable population, urban, rural, and also focusing on education. I think we had a very interesting discussion, and now we have to come to an end, but it's not just another meeting. We have other meetings and also sharing the experience, what the program we have been implementing in the course of this year. And particularly also allow me to touch a bit, just to mention that the summit on the AU Summit on Industrialization and Economic Diversification that will take place in Niger in November, will offer another great opportunity really to address those issues and sharing lessons, concretely what is being done, and also how to really accelerate taking into advantage the opportunities, the mega trend we mentioned during our exchange. So to conclude this event, which we hope we have all enjoyed, not only the panelists, but also the participants, but due to the time, so we could not go in the different questions. So on behalf of the organizers, I really would like to thank UNIDO Director General, His Excellency Gert Muller, to thank Mr. Nobuya Araguchi and his team, Professor Lopez, Professor Tregena, Professor Aure, and also Her Excellency Dr. Rania Al-Mashat for your valuable time and participation in this event. A special thanks go to the event organizing team of the 8th Tokyo International Conference on Africa Development, the TICAD8. So today was the beginning of the UNIDO TICAD8 week that we continue with side event tomorrow, Thursday, Friday, and even on Sunday, 28. We also thank you, our attendees, for joining the discussion. We hope you can join to other side events of this conference. So with this, I say thank you, best regards, and looking forward to the next panel discussion or on the ground, visiting, site visit to showcase concretely what is being done in applying, in translating in action the recommendation of the report. Once again, thank you very much.